People power growth, but recruiting and onboarding are expensive, exhausting, and absolutely overwhelming. I've been there, and it doesn't have to be this way. Welcome to Hire and Empower. I'm your host, Molly McGrath. Join me as we interview leaders who care about their teams and distill powerful lessons from them. This show is sponsored by H&E, helping organizations to find their best hire and empower them for success. Learn more at hiringandempowering.com. All right, attorneys, let's do this. Listen up. And for my support staff that's supporting in regards to marketing, the PLAs, legal administrative assistants, you're going to want to listen to today's conversation. We're talking about the creative law shop. Nervous your contracts don't cover your basis. You're like, well, we're attorneys. We know contracts. Why do we want to listen to this? You do want to listen to this because we have your kindred spirit here. We have attorney Paige Hulse with us today. And wait until you listen to our conversation that we're going to talk about her entrepreneurial journey, her attorney journey in regards to what she's doing in regards to her law firm in particular, and what she has done to embrace the digital and online space. So this is going to be a conversation. Grab your pen, grab your paper. We're going to have all the goodies and the links in the show notes. We'll mention them at the episode, but Paige, first and foremost, thank you for being my guest today.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me, and I'm really excited about this conversation.
Yes, I was so intrigued when I found shopcreativelaw.com. And then as we were speaking, then you sent me to your law firm website that I'd love for you to later on in the show to share a little bit about that, paigehulse.com. Oh my goodness, people. If you want to stand out in the legal space, write this down right now. If you can't listen to the rest of this episode and just go check out her website. And I'd love for you to shoot me an email, shoot Paige an email, and tell us what your first gut reaction was when you saw this gorgeous piece of work that you're like, holy moly, you do not emulate the stereotypical lawyer. I want to hire you just based on this video that is rocking on this gorgeous piece of art website. This is unbelievable. Gorgeous.
That is so kind. I appreciate that.
Yes. So tell us a little bit about your journey. You and I were chatting before. I'm like, whoa. Time out. We got to record because this is so good. Tell us a little bit about your journey as, where you got to Creative Law Shop and sprinkling in your attorney piece in there too.
Absolutely. Well, again, thank you for having me.
Yes.
So I am based out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I went to the University of Tulsa for law school. As I always tell people, I had, for some reason, decided at the ripe old age of 11 that I was going to go to law school. We still to this day have no idea where that came from, but here we are. It happened. Got to law school, and I was all of a sudden a little bit thrown off kilter because I didn't know exactly what type of law I wanted to practice. However, I come from an entrepreneurial family based in Oklahoma. So that immediately leads you to usually one very specific area, which is oil and gas. And that is where I landed. And I really enjoyed it. There's something about the oil and gas industry where, and not to go on a tangent here too much, but just about everyone that's in that industry has to have an entrepreneurial flair. That's what sets it apart. And that's why I was drawn to it initially, because you have to be willing to ride that roller coaster. But I digress.
Oh, yes.
So I practiced as an oil and gas litigator for 2 years before starting my own firm. It was a fantastic experience. There was nothing that was easy about it. I was in court, I think, the first week that I actually started practicing. So when I say trial by fire, it was a trial by fire. It was a lot, a lot just condensed into a short amount of time. The longer I was practicing, or the more I got established in my practice, I should say, the more I recognized that what had drawn me to the law in the first place and the clients that I enjoyed interacting with the most were business owners. I have a heart, I'm an advocate by nature, and I have a heart for people who are, going out and just striking out on their own. And those were my favorite. Those were the clients that I always asked to work with. So one thing led to another. After a couple of years of that practice, I started my own law firm. And something that we were talking about again before we got started, when I decided to start my practice, then once you make the decision, that's scary enough, right?
Yes.
And then you have to figure out how to do it well and not just fold. Especially, I was well aware of the fact that I was a very, very young attorney to be starting my practice. And so I studied and studied and studied. And I didn't just study, I really didn't study other lawyers at all. I was looking at other industry experts in industries that mirror our own in terms of selling professional services, and just service providers in general. Gathered, my nuggets of knowledge from those studies and branched out. And what I was explaining earlier is something that in hindsight, it might have been the best mistake I ever made, but it was by far the best decision I made. The advice that you get when you start a law firm is to niche down in your practice area. And that's true to a certain extent, but as my mentor always says, and I will take his wording right now, firm on the objective and flexible on the approach. I wanted to work with business owners, but I wanted to be able to help them in a variety of ways. And I knew that the best way to get established and actually get my feet under my law firm per se was to focus on working with one niche group to get started and really just carve out a reputation with that group. So I focused on the wedding industry, which seemed like the crazy decision, because most lawyers don't think of, it's an overlooked market. That's exactly why I dove into it. It's a completely overlooked market. There is not much legal support within that market. Most of the time, if a wedding professional did have an issue arise, it's not like they're going to go to the high rise downtown and hire the lawyer for, $7.50 an hour to handle a breach of contract dispute. There was a little bit of a hole there, and I recognized it and capitalized on it. So for the first couple of years, and I'll get into that more later on, I worked exclusively with wedding professionals. Within about 2 to 3 months of starting my practice, I was starting to get a name for myself, and I was starting to get inquiries from people around the country and sometimes around the world, asking if I would draft up their contracts for them. And I got to the point where I was spending a few hours a day emailing people back with the same template email of, I am so sorry, I wish I could help you, but can't practice law across state lines. And then and I'm not the first person that's done this, but it just struck me that there was a way to think outside the box. And like I said to you earlier, when you see everybody zigging, look and see if you can zag. And so I took a look at different businesses like LegalZoom, and I just started thinking, okay, what case precedent have they forged ahead? What case precedent have they left in their wake that can help me out? So to make a long story short, I took those contracts that I had been drafting for my own clients and for myself and redacted our names and converted them into contract templates. And I did not soften them at all. They, like my independent contractor agreement that I use for my independent contractors, is what is in the shop. And I don't care if people wish it was only a 2-page document. It is strong. I have been to court and I have argued it several times. So anyways, that business, it took, I don't want to sugarcoat it, starting a law firm and starting the shop in the same year was pretty idiotic of me in terms of I was clocking in hours that were ungodly for a while, and just about ran myself into the ground, but luckily was able to get both off the ground. And then after a short amount of time, the shop just took off. There's a lot to say behind that, but the reason being, I knew from the outset, and to this day, it's extremely important to me. And I think it's reflected in both of my websites. I studied the people that I was catering to, I studied what made them comfortable, the language they spoke per se, like just the industry vernacular, the look, the aesthetic that they were going for. And especially because working with wedding professionals, that's more important than a lot of other industries. And I created, hopefully, and this is the feedback I get frequently, but a space that my clients feel extremely comfortable in an approachable environment.
Oh, yes.
So there's obviously a lot to say about that, but I won't wax poetic about it for too long.
Well, that's why I kicked off this podcast with just go to the website and tell me what you feel. Tell me what you think. And before I even knew who you were catering to and your backstory and how you got there, I'm like, okay, wait, let's talk about the shop. And you said, well, I have my law firm too. I'm like, what's that address? And I pull it up and immediately it emulates. I really want to, can I just dive into 3 main points that really struck me about you?
Yeah.
First of all, you come from an entrepreneurial lineage, right?
Yeah, it made all the difference.
All the difference. Like everything you see is an opportunity. It's creativity. It's how can I, zag when they're zigging and vice versa. But what I love that you kicked off with is you didn't look at other law firms. You hung your shingle, made the decision you were going to do that at how old were you when you did that?
Let me think about math. We're lawyers. Math's not my thing. I was 28, 29.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Hung your own shingle. It was already in your bone, in your blood. You're a risk taker, and you're going to own your own thing, and you're going to do it your way. But you didn't look at other law firms. You got deeply curious, and you got your tunnel vision and went into personal services. Exactly. That is, most people hang their shingle. And one of my mentors, my greatest advice that when I started my business in 2008, I don't know, I guess I was around the same age as you. And she said to me, a confused mind says no. And because what I was doing is I was shooting her all of my competition's website. Here's their language. Here's what they're doing here. Back then there weren't Facebook ads, social media, none of that. But I just was finding everything, their mailers they would send to me in the mail when people used to do that. And it was all my competition. She's like, stop. Stop. Like, I love that you just turned off all the noise and just went to that, coupled with, I don't think I really have ever heard this from any entrepreneur. It's easy to sit behind your computer all day with a glass of wine and dig through the website, but you got on planes, you went to the conferences, you immersed yourself into their industry. And what I love that you said is you studied the people you were catering to.
Exactly. And going back to, and this, no matter what type of law firm that anybody listening or what type of business anybody listening has, what was drilled into my head, not just common sense, but drilled into my head by my entrepreneurial family as well, is you have nothing but your reputation when you're a business owner. There's nothing that will make or break you like your reputation. And that's coming from the daughter of somebody who works in a who has had his own business in a very volatile industry for years and years now, decades. And to this day, when I run across somebody that knows my dad from work, just, work events, whatever it may be, the first words out of their mouth are always something to the effect of, that man has the most integrity that I've ever met of anybody in this industry. And so I grew up knowing that was what I aspired to. The second point to that as well, when I was talking about how there was a hole in the market, this was a very, very overlooked and honestly looked down upon market by the legal world, which is very, very true. There were a few other attorneys that were doing it, and they hadn't had much competition for a while. And I mean, I knew that was going to, especially because I focus on intellectual property today, I'm very, very, very have a heightened awareness of copying and those types of claims that can be made. And I didn't want any part of that. And so to this day, I do not look at any competitors, and I mean that with every ounce of sincerity and truth that I have. I do not look at any competitor's work because, one, it's going to skew my thinking. Two, there's no one to compete with but myself, because what does the success of my business have to do with anybody else other than what I can produce? And I have to produce the most best work I can get out of myself. And that begins and ends with myself. Nobody else. But yeah, that's a hard lesson. And I have lawyers reach out to me frequently, asking for advice on how to get started and just how to carve out their own thing, and all of those questions that we all have. And it happens every now and then, but I'll start to see, after our conversation, I'll see all of a sudden trademarks pop up on their, estate planning website. And then I'll see the variation of the creative law shop with a couple of contracts pop up, and that's fine. It's a free market. I believe in capitalism, but you're distracted. Like you're distracted and you're influenced. And so that was one of many things that was drilled into my head by my family, by my dad in particular. And he's the one that said that if he would help, he offered to help, which I was able to luckily get the firm up and running. But he said, if you need any help with anything, you figure out how to run the business, but I will help. I'll loan you money to go to different creative conferences so that you can literally get your face in the room and actually start the conversation, because you don't have a fighting chance without that. And he's a man of few words. So that stuck with me. And that was a gold mine of advice that literally, I don't know where I'd be without having taken that advice.
I absolutely love that, especially in this day and age. Get your face in the room or you don't have a fighting chance.
Mm-hmm. And it was, I wasn't going, I had to strip all ego and all arrogance aside, because, when you're a lawyer, you're used to people coming to you for help and thinking. I was going to creative conferences as an attendee. Sometimes I would not even speak about the law. Like no one there would even know I was a lawyer, but they got to know me as Paige. And then they figured out that I was a lawyer later on. And then they figured out that I wasn't pushy about it. And those are the people that 5 years later are still sending me referrals.
Wow. And some of your clients are the biggest wedding planners for celebrities, and right?
It's been this summer was a very interesting one. I got within 1 degree of separation from somebody that worked from Princess Diana, and one of my contracts from the creative law shop was used for a wedding that will be on TV. And I obviously can't disclose any details further than that, but it was one of those moments where I was like, wow, this is weird. You very literally never know where the path will take you.
Wow. And it's not weird. What is it? What's the saying that luck is when opportunity meets preparation?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I found out both of those things within like a 48-hour period. And it was just like, man, this is, it has evolved.
Oh my goodness. So many golden nuggets here for number one, entrepreneurs. Number two, for attorneys that, get overwhelmed, especially in the creative space, but you truly had the entrepreneurial seizure. You started a law firm while you started a, I guess, e-com business, for a lack of a better term, where you had a digital business at the exact same time. And what happened, for my recollection, is that the online shop absolutely blew up, right? Exploded.
It did. It was, there aren't many, again, I'm speaking in regards to my, at the time, extremely niche market. There weren't many lawyers focusing on it, and there definitely weren't many that had a background of litigating contracts, much less just being a lawyer. And so I was able, going back to reputation, I was able to, if I shared anything about my history and, just showed one example of what an oil and gas contract of any sort looks like, that gives you the gravitas to at least get your foot in the door for a conversation typically. So yeah, it was, and again, I don't want to sugarcoat it or glamorize it or anything like
Right.
that. It was, that first year was hard. Each one of those contracts that are in the shop took about 15 to 18 hours on average to draft. And it was, so it was a hard first year, but it just started to snowball, and we can get into different marketing tactics if you would like to, but it was something that you had to start slow, and then all of a sudden it felt like an overnight success a year later type of
That is
thing.
overnight, a year later to build a bit. Most people fail a business in the first year, right? So I love that you're not sugarcoating it. And I want the message I want to get, because I was sharing with you so often, I will have, especially in this new age, right? So your contracts, I mean, my goodness, all the various contracts that you have in here because attorneys are now finally getting into the website development and website terms and policies and hiring contracts, and very different with working with marketing and different collaboration contracts that you have in here. I mean, it's from my experience, from the attorneys that I speak with, transactional attorneys and estate planning litigators, family law, what have you, and they're starting to emerge in this area. VAs, outsource. They don't have these contracts, or these, Bob Green from down the street who did your dentist websites doing your website, and he's sending you his contract that he downloaded off of wherever, and attorneys are just signing it. And I was sharing with you that a lot of my attorneys that I work with are either don't have these contracts because it's not their area of expertise, number one, and or number two, just signing these contracts that they're getting from Bob Green, websitebuilder.com. And what I love, and I heard that you said, is, listen, I have litigated a lot of these contracts in the past. And I think it's surprising to me, and I'd love your perspective on this. I'm surprised at how many attorneys, number one, don't even read the contracts that they sign. And number two, if they go south, they just pay on it or buy it out or what have you, and just surrender to it, versus really using that muscle that they paid a lot of money, time, and heartache to get with just a law degree.
Exactly. And this might have been, I don't know if this was just my personality or my, I think it was my youth when I started out, but when I started slowly telling my peers, my mentors, et cetera, that I was going to start my own law firm, my number one fear was, and this again, coming from the perspective of just being purely a litigator to start. Well, let me back up and correct that statement. My previous boss, when I say trial by fire, he gave me the best opportunity in hindsight that I could have had, because he made me figure out how to write a contract. And I mean, like literally came into my office and would say, all right, we have a client who's starting a business and he has $20 million in investments. You need to draft up the operating agreement. That was the first time I ever drafted an operating agreement. And then going to court and defending them afterwards when somebody tries to pierce the corporate veil, you start to get real. There's no training quite like that when it comes to contracts. But going back to my previous statement, I think it was my youth, but I was well aware that if there was ever any issue with my law firm, I trusted my entrepreneurial gut. I trusted my business brain. I trusted the fact that at least I recognized that in order to run my own law firm, I had to wear my business hat and my lawyer hat. You can't just wear one, and that's a problem I see a lot of people making. So I knew I could make it work as long as the bar association let me make it work as well. So I was always extremely aware of, if there was ever any sort of dispute, if there was ever anything like my worst case scenario, a judge is not going to probably fall on my side. Typically, I'm going to have an uphill battle and proving that I'm always acting in the best interest of my client, always acting with integrity, et cetera, et cetera. So I didn't screw around when I wrote those. it was a lot of the templates that you see in there are the ones that I wrote for myself. Like when I hired my web designer to make my website, that's the contract I had her sign. Our names are redacted from it. Graphic designer to make my logo, exact same thing. Independent contractor agreement, exact same thing. I mean, I can go on and on, but all of the contracts, VA, a lot of those that I've hired out, again, have been, they're for myself. So I I will not mess around with not having that side buttoned up. It's too hard to, there's enough to worry about as a business owner. There's no need to there's no need to create a loose end where there doesn't need to be one.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Not even just like the financial side of it, the intellectual property side of it, but first of all, thank you for all the time and energy that you put into doing that and creating this platform for attorneys to go to, because from my consulting and coaching side of my business, I cannot tell you in our weekly calls how much of our time is expelled on just frustration and heartbreak and upset about hiring this guy to do my website, and then he disappeared, and this happened and that happened. And it's the capital that people, especially business owners, do not have a measuring stick for is the emotional capital.
Right. That is exactly right. And that is a big lesson that working with wedding professionals taught me, because when you're litigating a breach of contract dispute in the wedding industry, you want to talk about emotions tied to it. It is, I will not waste our time talking about all my COVID horror stories, but I will say every single client that I had ever worked with was in touch with me. I think Shutdown started on a Monday. I spoke to every single person that had ever, or I had an inquiry from every single person that had ever passed through my firm by that Thursday. So almost every single person I'd ever worked with had a breach of contract dispute suddenly, usually more than one of them. So 2020 was the most ridiculous year of my life. I know it was for everybody, but as an attorney, and I was stepping out of the wedding industry at that time too. So as an attorney who was going out on a different path, leaving the wedding industry, and then all of a sudden hundreds of people had dozens of breach of contract scenarios on their hands each. And like I think you mentioned a bit earlier, some of my clients they do celebrity weddings. We're talking, or they do weddings that you'll never know about because they're worth $5 million and every single person has to sign an NDA. And when those people have, the government shut down their wedding, they typically have a family friend who's a lawyer who can just take it on and can try to make my client's life a living hell. And so that's when the shop really took off then, but it also took off then because I made a business decision at that time to start offering lifetime updates for my templates. So what that means is I went back through every single one of my templates and I started adding in the language that, for example, judges were requiring locally here when I would go to court and be arguing on behalf of the business owner. And a judge would say, well, if you only had this in the contract, maybe we would have allowed XYZ. I would go back in and start adding it into the template. So every time somebody makes a purchase from the shop, they get the most up-to-date document that is informed by my experience fighting that document. Or fighting for that document, I should say.
Yeah.
You hopefully not fighting the document. Yeah.
I can't even imagine 2020 for you.
Oh, it was, I had actually had an unexpected surgery in February of that year, and I was cleared to start back at work on whatever that day was, March 13th, I think.
Yes.
And then the shutdown happened like a couple days later. I prefaced the statement with, this is not something I am bragging about. It was hell. I took 2 Sundays off in 2020. It was just, I had people calling me at 2 a.m. Not that I was answering the calls, but it was just mass panic. It was absolute mass panic. And again, going back to something I had said before we started recording, and apologies for talking your ear off here, but
no, that's
going back to ethics are always at the forefront of my mind with every single, not just because that's an altruistic statement to make, but again, I'm a business owner and I refuse to let my ethics slip on my watch. It's just, I'm not going to let that happen. Um, and our duty as lawyers is always to work in the best interests of our client. The question to me became, okay, I did not have time to add more contracts to the shop. I didn't have time when I was fighting that many breach of contract disputes. I didn't have time to take 15 hours out of my, out of my day to, to write another contract somebody was looking for. But I mean, that question of, again, what does it mean to truly work in the best interest of the client? I had the vehicle, which was the shop. I typically would have documents like my termination agreement, my rescheduling agreement that I knew I could take a little bit of time, redact the names from, put it in the shop. And sure, I don't make the same amount of money as if I were drafting that custom for somebody, but my clients needed it overnight. And that was just a ethical, integrity based decision on my part. But that was something that I felt like it was just the right thing to do. So yeah, it's 2020 taught me just like all of us, I know, but taught me a lot as a business owner. It was a refining experience.
Wow. Well, as you were talking, taking 2 Sundays off, and not from a place of, heroic and bragging and all that, but as you were talking, I mean, listening to your passion, walking in law school and fuzzy around what type of area of law you wanted to be in, taking your entrepreneurial spirit and lineage, in addition to finding the niche, because you're an entrepreneur, you got very, very deeply curious. Hearing you speak, like, good God, like, I think 2020, that what you described is a hell of a lot better than people that froze and panicked and sat on their couch and drank themselves close to death and watched Netflix all and paralyzed. Like, you got, if that is not the definition of a service, mission driven attorney entrepreneur, I don't know what is. And in hindsight, my goodness, like what it's done for your business. Exhausting, yes, but we were all exhausted. So pick your level of exhaustion. Is it going to be a place from creativity and service, or is it going to be from a place of fear and paralysis?
Exactly. And there's nothing comfortable about running your own business. If there is something comfortable about it, you've either gotten to a point where you can just outsource every aspect of it and you're just, when I say just a CEO, I don't mean that in a demeaning way,
I know,
but it's different,
Yes,
you're not the boots on the ground. But I've always operated from the perspective of, okay, it's uncomfortable. We have to make that discomfort our comfort zone. It's just the same way I was a college athlete. It's the exact same concept. You're not getting faster if you're not running hard enough to be uncomfortable. Your muscles are literally not growing unless you are uncomfortable. Being an entrepreneur, being a business owner is the exact same ideology in my mind. And so when you're faced with that moment of, you can either be afraid or you can just dive in and at least fail while trying, I would always choose the latter rather than the former, always.
Absolutely. Let me ask you this question. So would you be comfortable sharing high level about, in hindsight, of having your law firm and then having this online business and what it provided for you when you got sick?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think this is really important to share. So just the Cliff Notes version, I dealt with a very serious illness that required me to travel around the country to like Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic type serious, not just a cold I couldn't shake type of deal.
Yeah.
It was really bad. And I had to, by necessity, not by choice at all, but by necessity, I had to build a business that allowed me to all of a sudden get a phone call that said I could go to Mayo Clinic next week and be there for 2 weeks. So I had to build a very, very flexible business that allowed me to work around that. On the law firm side, trademark law is what I spend about, I would say, 80% to 90% of my time on. That's what I'm passionate about from just a purely legal perspective. I love intellectual property, and that type of law is conducive with those types of life needs. We'll put it as the business overall. Part of the reason why I decided after the first year of the shop, I think I had maybe 10 contracts in there. And it was so hard to get those 10 written and to get them uploaded and to figure out all of the nuances of how to start an online shop. I mean, I had to learn so much. But the reason why I decided to dive headfirst into that is because during those times when I had to step away from the firm for a little bit, it was something that was able to float me for a little while. It was something that was able to supplement, just from an income perspective. This is just my own personal opinion, but starting my law firm, my husband and I had been married for a couple of years when I did it. And for him to let me, and he's a financial advisor, so he's, money is apparently important. But he was, to this day, I can't believe he was completely on board with me doing this, because it sounded asinine in hindsight. Like, hey, I'm going to go start a law firm for creative entrepreneurs, which turned out to be the fastest growing industry of that year, but I digress.
Oh, yes.
And so anyways,
talk about being a visionary.
It was just something I saw exploding because all of my friends were getting married, and it was just like, oh, it's just sitting right there. I just saw it very crystal clear. But creating the shop allowed me to have a life outside of my business. And I don't mean that from the perspective of I got to go on vacations all the time, and not from that perspective. And that's great. And I am still aspiring to get to that spot, just to be completely blunt. It allowed me to have a life, to literally take care of my life, to literally take care of my health, because there was not going to be a business if there was no healthy me to run it. And so it just allowed me to take care of what I needed to take care of from the personal side, which also I can't, again, going back to that concept I keep hitting on, but thinking of the best interest of the client at all times. I could have been as sick as I was. I could have really run myself into a place of bad burnout, like bad burnout, because I was just really, really ill. And this allowed me to step back when I needed to, and just, again, firm on the objective, flexible on the approach. That's what I keep coming back to. And again, I have to credit my mentor for that. That was not, if he's listening, I know those were not my words, but that's been a driving ethos in my life.
That is, and thank you for sharing your story. And I did ask your permission before we recorded. So I just want to clarify that, because I think it's such an important part of it. Again, you're such a visionary. Did you foresee having that journey of Mayo Clinic and what have you? No, but I think in the message for all of us is what I'm taking away from this is really, really, really to don't look at other competition, get deeply curious about your niche, immerse yourself into the people, and really for you to be speaking into their listening and emulating that through all your branding, which you have done. Even when I opened your website, I'm like, this is like walking into a custom dress shop, and you're like, well, here's my ideal client that I started with, and boom, it just, right down to the numbers. I'm like, this is like, Chanel number 5, like just gorgeous, eloquent. And you said so many people are like, oh my goodness, I'm sure they hire you. And you said that you get more comments from men than
which
women.
Is always funny. Yeah. It's, as my business has shifted, I have a couple of other businesses now as well, but right now about half, generally speaking, my client base is 50-50 men and women. And so as I stepped away from the wedding industry and started working with just online business owners, fellow entrepreneurs, and I work with a lot of farmers and ranchers, and just, again, I can get into that later. But anyways, that was something I was well aware of, okay, well, what I was doing then, it doesn't necessarily always work now. But it makes it, you stand out, and it makes, when I say, this next statement gets misconstrued very, very easily, but the best advice I've gotten from my own clients, who are actual marketing geniuses who get hired. I have clients that make millions of dollars a year just using Instagram and working as, I mean, in all sorts of different genres, but marketing specialists in particular. And the best thing that you can do, especially as a service provider, is to create a personal brand for yourself. And that doesn't mean that you have to become a legal influencer or something like that. That's where the statement gets misconstrued. But hopefully when people come to my website, they get a sense of familiarity with my personality and what it would feel like to work with me. And that's usually the feedback I get as well. Just, it's comfortable.
Comfortable, approachable,
Yeah.
soft, like, yes, all of it. What would you say in closing? A few things. Number one, thank you again for being our guest. I mean, my mind is just blown on multiple, building an online digital message, being very deeply curious and aware. All my friends are getting married. I see this. I mean, just even what you experienced in 2020 with all of this, number one, with your niche client, but number two, with all this explosion in the digital space.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you talk about a thought leader. What would be your message to attorneys, to entrepreneurs now that, you know, are thinking like a lawyer, and here I am, I own my law shop? And what would you give for them as maybe some drive-by coaching, a value bomb in regards to expanding their horizon and their thinking so they can have some freedom and autonomy and not be chained to owing the file consistently? If they want to take a vacation, they get sick, or they need to take time off for a sick child, or whatever it might be.
So a couple of thoughts came to mind just right away listening to your question, and I'm thinking also of conversations I've had with lawyers who have law firms such as estate planning law firms. Time intensive. You can't necessarily create a contract shop the way I have in the same way. You can't create that for a trust, and it's just different.
Yes.
So when I've spoken to law firm owners such as who I'm thinking of in that regard, going back to the advice that my dad gave me of go meet your clients where they're at, when you can do it in person, but meet your clients where they're at. It's not necessarily about just bringing in client in the door. It's bringing in that ideal client who is going to turn into just a fountain of referrals. And that just spider web. So that would be number one. But number two, I would say, I think there is a time and a place to learn from other lawyers. If you are being very, very specific about your niche, again, I'm just going to stick with the estate planning example.
Please.
If you know you're going to start an estate planning law firm, sure, it's like when I started my firm, I reached out to a few people I knew who had started intellectual property law firms, and they were kind enough to go to lunch with me and sit down and mentor me for an extended amount of time. And I paid them for it as well. There's no worse. The worst words that you could ever say are quick question.
Yeah.
Your brain.
Yes.
So that just finding a mentor in every field. And so my point being, there's a time and a place to learn from the other people in your industry, but that time and that place is a very, very brief moment in time. And your focus should never remain on that. Your focus should never stay on your fellow estate planning attorneys. Start looking at other service providers who either overlap with you or just run parallel to you in certain ways. For example, I learned a lot of what I learned about the way that I run my law firm came from, I can name the most random people, but I mean, financial advisors, accountants, read the book Traction. That's going to
Yes.
be huge.
Oh, yes.
And so I can again dovetail on that, but I don't want to waste too much time with that. But yeah, just getting your face in the door so that you can make some real connections, because everyone knows a sleazy attorney. You don't want to be that person, and you have an uphill battle to not be that person, because that's
Yes.
what you will automatically be typecasted as. And again, reputation. And yeah, just don't keep your eyes on your peers for that long. If you look at them, just let it be for a minute. I have people I know, and it's just a cat and mouse game to me, and it just kind of makes me chuckle. But I have people I know, when I post a blog post about something, the same blog post will go up the next day with just a few words changed. And it's like, that's great and all, but eventually it's going to get stagnant, because you're not looking ahead. You're looking to your left and your right, and you're only going to get so far.
Oh, I love that. We're all, I mean, gosh, I go back to all the marketing events in the early and mid 90s that I'd go to at the legal conference, and all the breakout sessions, they'd be like, study your competition, study your competition.
Mm-hmm.
And they would get so, to your point, it was just, you're becoming a commodity.
Yeah. Let your copywriter do that, and then draft your copy for your website in a way that sets you apart.
Right.
I mean, that type of thing. Like, yeah, there is a time and a place. It's not like there's no value to that advice, but it doesn't have to be you. And that's part of adopting the CEO mindset, and recognizing that that's something that you have to do will put you light years ahead of a lot of people that are starting law firms, or that are running law firms, that are just working as a technician within their own firm. You don't have to be that person who's studying the competition. You hire somebody to do it. Like,
and you hire, I just get into the mind, speak into the mind, speak into the listening of the end user in a way that makes a difference for them. Because Paige, so many people say that, right? But any of our listeners, if you go to Paige's law firm website, you will see in a second, you hear set yourself apart, blah, 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 don't show up like a stereotypical attorney. But I've never, and I'm truly, truly not stroking your ego here, I have never seen a law firm that has honestly nailed it the way you have with PaigeHulse.com and your law firm.
Thank you. And that hire people smarter than you would be, I guess, my last point to that statement, because that is all the credit goes to my web designer and graphic designer there, who, again, like, get in the head of your clients, and they'll tell you exactly what they would be looking for, and then ask them to create it for you.
Yes. Oh, thank you for being our guest. Thank you for sharing your heartfelt story and your journey from law school till now. And I know our listeners probably have pages and notes like I do. Tell us a little bit about Law Shop and shopcreativelaw.com.
Yeah. So, and thank you again. This was a really great conversation. It was wonderful being able to talk to you today. So if you are listening, and if you have clients, or even if you have any contract needs, you can go to shopcreativelaw.com. I am the attorney who's drafted all of them. They've all been drafted for myself or a specific client. They're not just arbitrary contracts. And I also, we were talking about before the recording started, I have people purchase contracts from literally around the world. And so anybody listening, I'm always looking for referrals in different states. So I'm happy to hear from anybody listening, and see if we can start a networking relationship.
Oh, great. Yes, because it's, as you have said, it's one thing to get the contracts, but then there's a whole nother thing when you get to the litigation phase, and you can't cross state lines, as you said.
Yeah.
Great. Oh, Paige, thank you so much for being a visionary, for bringing your entrepreneurial spirit to the law and all your wisdom, because it's a consistent uphill battle that I'm faced with my clients in regards to get them to bring, as you said, that entrepreneurial hat and the lawyer hat into the room, into every conversation at all times. It's not an either or, it has to be that and.
Exactly. Always.
Yeah, beautiful work. My goodness, you nailed it with your branding.
Thank
You've
you.
nailed it with, and thank you for doing the hard work in regards to these contracts, because if, there's many things I hope our listeners take away, and especially employees, you guys that are managing these attorneys, that they sign everything and don't read them, or, really bring this conversation to them for these marketing and website and branding and logos and all the creative things that they're doing, to really pause and take back their power to find these contracts that Paige has spent, what'd you say, over 18 hours per contract on?
15 to 18
Yeah.
each.
Yes.
It's taken a minute.
So thank you for doing the hard work, and I look forward to you getting all of your Sundays back.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Me as well.
Okay, until next time, guys. And again, Paige, thank you for being a leader, leading leaders.
Thank you. It's great to speak with you.
We've reached the end of another impactful conversation on the Hire and Empower podcast. Whether this was your first episode or you're a longtime listener, I know you can tell I have passion for people. Whether you're a business owner, employee, executive, or hiring manager, I understand the situation you're in. Hiring, onboarding, and leadership is expensive, exhausting, overwhelming, and if that's not enough, it's also time-consuming. My friends, it doesn't have to be this way. There is a team at H&E that has your back. For over 25 years, they've transformed over 4,000 law firms into efficient, effective, profitable assets for their business and made it fun to come to work again. Check out our Smart Hire solution, our employee leadership program, and the 66-day law firm turnaround at hiringandempowering.com.